So this morning, when I got up for my kids, I fed my starter so it would be nice and bubbly and active. You can look in there, you can see all of the bubbles in it. That lets you know that it is an active starter and is what you want. If yours isn't bubbly after you fed it, you might need to rehabilitate your starter, which means you just need to go through a couple of rounds of feeding it, every day to make sure it's back up to its good bubble. Okay. We're starting with our basic loaf, our basic sourdough one. So we're using our scale, got to use the scale. I find the cup measurements just don't work out as accurate. And if you want your stuff to turn out every time, use a scale. We're going to use 100 grams of our active starter. I'm going to give it a little bit of a stir. There we go. And then we're going to pour it in here. And we want 100 grams of active sourdough starter.
You have a question. What if your starter gets mold?
If your starter gets mold, unfortunately, got to start all over. You got to toss it. I had that happen to me once when I went on vacation and I forgot to put it in the fridge to keep it, and it molded. So yes, I had to. It was sad. It was a very sad day, but I had to throw it away because you just don't want to take that risk. And luckily it takes, your starter shouldn't mold unless it's been, forgotten for a good hot minute. We were on vacation for 10 days and that's when it started to develop like that reddish pinkish mold. So we just had to toss it. So 100 grams of active starter in this bowl as well. And now we're going to add 375 grams of warm water. Got to use warm water. So I'm going to put, and that is about like 1.5 cups or so. There we go. Almost there. Perfect. But I smell my oil heating up here and I think it's nice and ready. So let me do my drop test and we can pop these chicken in it. If it bubbles, perfect. You see, we got a nice bubble. That means it is ready for our chicken fillets to go in. Let me get a pair of tongs. And then I'm going to turn it down to about a 5 because you want to kind of do a nice slow cook versus a high cook because you want it to cook through without burning. Make sure I'm going to get my oil underneath all parts. Perfect. And now we're going to let our chicken cook up. Take this out of the way.
You got a question? The water needs to be warm?
Yes. I like my water to be warm because it incorporates into the flour much better. You can do it with cold, it just doesn't work quite as well. Okay, we're going to add 100 or 375 grams of warm water to this. And it doesn't have to be hot. I just nice warm, like 80, 90 degrees. There we go. And that is simply because when you try to do cold in there, it doesn't incorporate into the flour well, so you can't get a good first mix on it. And so it incorporates, it leads to a little bit of more sticky in the beginning, but it hydrates well. We're going to put in about 2 teaspoons of salt. If you want to use a scale, it's between 8 to 10 grams. I've got it good visual that I do in my hand, which works perfectly. And now I'm going to take my dough whisk and we're going to just whisk it up until it's completely incorporated. Now this is my basic one. Now we're going to add a couple more things into this one before we whisk it. We're going to add some sugar. Let me put it back on here. It is 50 grams of sugar, which is about 1/4 of a cup. So I'm just gonna, perfect. And then we're gonna add some cinnamon. I like to do my cinnamon by eye instead of by kind of the gram thing because it kind of falls out fast. So we're gonna use about, for this part, about 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. Makes a nice little pile in our hand. There we go. So I've got this one all mixed up. Now we're going to mix up this guy and incorporate it. And then we'll add 500 grams of unbleached bread flour to each one. Now, for our cinnamon honey butter one, we're also going to be adding more cinnamon later. We're going to make a lovely honey butter cinnamon mixture that when we go to shape it and we laminate our bread out, I'll make lovely layers with that. So it'll kind of make a honey butter swirl in our sourdough. Okay. Got this guy all mixed up. And you want to make sure you get that cinnamon mixed up pretty good. Otherwise, it kind of just floats on the top. Now,
you got a question? Are you making cinnamon buns?
No, I'm making a cinnamon honey butter sourdough loaf. So it's kind of a sweet loaf. I haven't done a sweet loaf in a while, and I feel like kind of craving it a little bit. Okay, we're gonna do 500 grams of unbleached bread flour. Gotta use bread flour, gotta use unbleached, because the bread flour has a higher gluten content than all-purpose flour. And unbleached helps with the fermentation process that sourdough needs. So we're going to add 500 grams to this guy. And then we'll add 500 grams to this one, which is about, again, around 3 cups. But I highly recommend that you use a scale, because you can have a cup that is packed in, which could weigh 50 grams more than another cup. So it can be really off. And again, 500 grams of flour. Almost there. Okay, let's check on our chicken right here. I can smell it sizzling up nicely. Still, it's a nice golden one. We still need a little bit longer on there because we want it a little bit more golden, but I like to check it, make sure. Especially when you have cheese in your frying in your mixture, you have to be you can't forget about it, because the cheese melts a little faster and can burn.
Yeah, question. Do you need to use bread flour for your starter?
Not for your starter, just for the bread. I actually use all-purpose for my unbleached, but all-purpose for my starter because it's cheaper, and that way I'm not wasting all my good bread flour. Okay, we've got our 500 grams in each one. Now I'm going to use my dough whisk, and we're going to mix it until it is just combined. And then we'll let it sit and hydrate for about 15 minutes before we do our first sets of our folds and stretches, which are really important for developing the gluten in your bread. So that is something, there's a lot of steps in sourdough that you can kind of, tweak with, but the folds and stretches are really important for giving you that delicious crumb on your bread. Okay. So this guy's mixed up.
How many loaves will this make?
This will make 2 good sized loaves. This is half of, we're going to be using the rest of this is the basic one, the one that I'm mixing up right now. This is about half of it. So it's a pretty good size loaf. I love to use them I'll cook them up at dinner time. And then our leftovers, I love to use for grilled cheeses or sandwiches, because they're absolutely delicious. Turn this guy down just a little bit. And now we're going to mix this up. And again, the reason we use the warm water is because it helps the flour hydrate a little bit faster, which is going to give me this lovely, nice, sticky dough right here. Versus if you use cold water, it would be a lot more shaggy and wouldn't kind of work in as nicely. Okay. We've got our 2 sourdoughs. First step done. I always give it a little feed afterwards, so it's kind of replacing what I took. So Because I have my bread flour out, I'm going to use bread flour, but I don't always use the bread flour. A lot of times I use all purpose. And so I'm going to feed my starter because we used a good portion to make our cinnamon honey butter bread, sourdough bread, and then our traditional loaf. So let me get a measuring spoon. And this is what I do pretty much every time I use it so that it stays nice and active. And again, I'm using my sourdough every single day, essentially. I'm going to do, since I just used a little bit, I'm just going to do 5 tablespoons of flour and then 5 tablespoons of water. Because I did feed it a little bit earlier there, but I want to just replace what I took. 4 and 5. And when you're feeding it, you just do equal parts flour and equal parts water. So then we get for the water, let's see, put a little more in here. And we're going to do 5 tablespoons. We'll mix it up, and then we'll do our stretch and folds on our sourdough.
You have a question? How did you learn to cook solo?
Years of practice. I started cooking for my family, like, my parents and whatnot, when I was 13. That was a chore. We had a bunch of different chores in our house, and we got to pick which one to do. And I decided I wanted to do the cooking and the cleaning up of the kitchen because it paid the best. And I got to control what we all ate. I got to pick what was for dinner. And it was the best chore, I'll tell you that. And so I started cooking at 13 for my family. And then I just loved it. I watched a lot of back in like the early 2000s, Hell's Kitchen was out, Top Chef. There was a bunch of cooking shows and I loved those and I watched them. And then my parents got me like the Gourmet magazine and Fine Cooking. And I just kind of, over the years, I just practiced and practiced. Now, I wasn't always perfect at cooking. I wasn't always great. I still make mistakes today. But in the beginning, it was a lot more rough. But now I've done it so long that it comes like a second nature to me. And that's what I always tell everybody. I said, it might be hard in the beginning, but the journey is well worth it, because if you can make delicious food for a fraction of the cost of going out, you're going to save in the long run, and you got a sense of accomplishment. Okay. I always like to, sometimes you get a little runniness on your jar. Make sure you clean it up, because once it dries, it's like concrete. It does not like to come up. So some people keep really neat jars and they'll put them like they change out their jars all the time. I just really do the quick clean on the outside, and if it ever gets too thick around the top, I just peel that off. But there's sourdough starter as fermenting, so it has these great bacteria in it that literally just keep it nice and healthy and kill off any bad bacteria that may enter. And then we'll put our little cheesecloth over the top. And now it's ready of our stretches and folds. Your dough, a lot of people complain that their dough is sticky, hard to work with. There's 2 ways you can work with it when it's sticky. You can really coat your hands with flour or coat your hands with water. Either one will help you prevent the stick. So I will do flour. I'll show you guys with flour with one and water with one so you can see the different methods. So if I'm going to do it with flour, I get a good handful like this, and I really coat my hands, and then I kind of coat the top of it just a little bit there. And then we do our stretch and our folds, which is pulling up and folding over, pulling up and folding over. And I do about 5 or 6 of these because this helps develop the gluten chains in it. And so, yes, it's sticky, but it gets you through the good first part of it. Yeah. Have a question?
Yes. So someone says her grandmother kept her starter in the fridge. Is there a difference to keeping it on the counter?
Keeping it on the counter means you got to feed it every 2 to 3 days. You can, if you're going to be gone and you don't bake as much, like you only bake a bread once a week, then keep it in the fridge, because the bacteria countertop, because if you're using it in the fridge, you have to take it out for a couple hours before you use it so that it can get nice and active, and then you have to feed it. But it just means you don't have to feed it as often when it's in the fridge versus on the counter. It needs to be fed every 1 to 3 days. Now, I did the flour method with this one to sticky, and I'm going to show you with the wet hands method for this one. So just get your hands a bit wet, but not soaking wet, but just like a little nice thing. And then you can pull up and fold, and you see how it does not stick to you when your hands are wet either. So both of those are good methods to use for the beginning. Now, as your dough sits and hydrates, it becomes less sticky. So by the time we are ready to do our laminating and shaping it, it will be less sticky and it won't be sticking as much to you. So it will be more like, okay, it's been about 20 to 30 minutes since my last stretch and fold. So this is going to be stretch and fold number 2. And we're going to do it the exact same way. We're going to pull up and fold it, pull up and fold it. If it's too sticky for you, you can again use flour or water to help you. But you're just going to go around and you're going to do about 5 pulled up and folds. And then we're going to do it with the next one. So we're just going to pull it up and fold it over, pull it up, fold it over. And I do about 5 to 6 of those for each one. And this is going to help build up the gluten in our sourdough bread. So we'll be back in another 20 to 30 minutes to do fold number 3. Okay, we are ready to do our third set of stretch and pulls. So we're just gonna reach in and like again, we're gonna pull it up and fold it over. Pull it up and fold it over. And we're just gonna do that 5 to 6 times per each one. And making sure you really lift it off the bottom of the bowl. I will say you really can't stretch and pull too much. And now we're going to do it with our next loaf. But if you look how it's already starting to get less sticky. And, most people don't realize that when you do, as soon as you mix your water in with your flour is when you're doing your bulk proofing on the counter. So it starts right away, which means we've already got like an hour of that down. Okay, we've got our stretch and folds. Now we'll be back in 30 minutes to do our last stretch and fold. Okay, we are ready for our last and final number 4 stretch and fold. So again, we're going to pull up and fold it over, pull up, fold over, pull up, fold over. You're going to do this about 5 to 6 times, just making sure you've got it all the way around. And then we'll do it with this one. This is our specialty loaf. And then what we're going to do is cover each one with some saran wrap. If you have one of those cheesecloth covers or a towel, you could do that as well. And we're going to let it proof on our countertop for about 4 to 6 hours, just depending on how hot your house is. If your house is pretty warm, then you'll need less time proofing on the kitchen counter versus in the fridge. So we're going to let this proof for about 4 to 6 hours. Then it will be time to laminate and do the next step. This is our traditional loaf. And then here, this one that's a little bit browner, this is going to be our sweet one. The browner color to it is because of the cinnamon that we added to the loaf. So first we're going to shape up our traditional loaf here. I'm going to do a nice spread of flour out here. This is so it doesn't stick. There. And then I'm going to turn this down just a wee.
You have a question. Do you ever cook vegan?
I've done things that are vegan, but no, we are not vegan or vegetarian. So most things that we do are have dairy products in it or meat. Now there are things that lend itself to being vegan that are naturally vegan in themselves, and we do have stuff like that. But as a rule, we do not. Okay, so we're going to do the laminating process, which is where we stretch it out into a nice big rectangle. And what I like to do is I kind of coat it with the flour on both sides so that it's not sticky to work with. And this doesn't change anything. It doesn't make my dough too floury or not. So And we're just stretching it out into a nice big rectangle. Cold proof in the fridge. So I'm going to give it a nice bit of flour on it. You can use rice flour if you want. I find all-purpose flour works just fine. And then what I like to do is I fold it into itself, kind of like you're making a little taco there. And then we're just going to roll this guy up. Nice. And then I'm going to pinch all of this together, and this is to shape it. So you're going to have the nice bottom part of your shaped is going to go into the basket right here. And then we just pinch this side together, and as it proofs in there, this is all going to melt away, but this is what's going to be going face down on your Dutch oven. So this right here is going to be the bottom of your bread, and the one that's sitting down is going to be the top of it where you're going to score it. So we've got our first guy done. And this one, what we'll do is we'll cover it with some plastic wrap, or if you have a towel or cheese up, and I'll pop it in the fridge for tomorrow night's dinner. So I like to do it for 24 hours, but you can do it anywhere between 12 and 48 hours. You can cold proof in the fridge. Just make sure your fridge is not too cold. I've learned my lesson before where my bread got frosty and it did not spring up. So here's our first one. We've got our burgers. This is going to have an inclusion in it, or kind of like we're going to make a special little buttery thing that we're going to spread on it after we laminate it. But I want to make sure it's nice and ready. So we need a stick of softened butter, about a tablespoon of honey, because this is going to be for our cinnamon honey butter. And I'm just going to eyeball it. There we go. And you can always use more honey if you want to. You can make it about as sweet as you want. And then we're going to use about 1/4 of a cup powdered sugar. There we go. And then a tablespoon of flour. And then we're going to add in some cinnamon. So let's get our tablespoon of flour. And where did I put my cinnamon? I must have forgotten to grab it out. Let me grab it real quick. Here it is. Gotta have the cinnamon for the honey butter. And then we need about a teaspoon of cinnamon. So there we go. And now this might be a little bit messy, but let me grab a spoon. We're going to mix it together, and then we're going to spread it on it after we laminate it, but we want to make sure we have it all made up first. And this is going to be our nice kind of like buttery thing that we're going to do on our, lost a little bit. Let's pop it back in here. That we're going to kind of cover after we laminate it. And remember, laminating is when we're making it out into that nice rectangle. And we're going to put this honey butter paste on it, and then it will cook up. It will melt into this delicious extra kind of swirl in our bread. But here you go. We've got a nice kind of cinnamon honey butter paste that we will spread on our cinnamon sourdough. So again, we want to start out with a good serving of flour on our counter so it doesn't stick. And now you could always wait for it to pop out. I'm not a patient person, so I always gently help it out of the bowl. But there are people who just love to wait for it to do the pop. Not me. Let me hands a little floury. Let's laminate it out.
I have a question. If someone wants to know why their burgers always leave a lot of juice in the pan, do you know?
That's just the natural fat coming out of it. And especially if you buy it from a grocery store, they've added, probably most of the time, they've added red dye and liquid to make your meat look more fresh and plumpy. And but it's normal. It comes out, especially if you're doing a smash burger. When you smash it, you're naturally pushing out the liquid, like the grease in it. But that's why you just smash it once on each side, and then you let it kind of cook there. That's why I add butter in my pan, so it's cooking in a nice, delicious butter. Okay, we're stretching it out into our lovely rectangle. This is called the laminating process. There we go. And now I'm going to take this, and we're probably going to get a little bit messy, but hey, sourdough is about getting messy. And you're just going to spread this. You don't want to get it too thick in any area, but all over. So kind of almost like a cinnamon roll, if you think about it. How when you do that cinnamon coating. So we're going to spread it right here. Get that there. Perfect. And we still have more, so we're going to be putting more in. So we're going to do our folds in. And then we're going to spread it on this part right here as well, because you want to have it swirled in there nicely. Because you don't want to have any part that doesn't have this delicious honey butter swirl on it. And then each little roll, we're going to do a nice honey butter on it. Can you just imagine how delicious this is going to be? This honey cinnamon sugar butter. Okay. Now we've got it. Let me get the last bit of this out. Don't want any of it to go to waste. Now you want to do it up until it's no longer going to be, you don't want to put it on the part where it's showing. You want the loaf to be able to be sealed up. So we've got it all sealed up inside there. There we go. And we're going to work to pinch it all together. Now you got to make sure you don't pinch. I don't do a crazy shaping. I just do literally pinching. Some people love to really scrape around and twirl it a lot. I don't feel like it's necessary to do that to get it to hold together. And especially when you have a swirl like this, if you break your sourdough by being a little too rough with it, then your delicious stuff can ooze out, and you don't want that. So here, we've got it in here, and we've sealed it all up. Perfect. And you see how we've kind of pinched all of it together. And then we're just going to cover that with plastic or, my first loaf I'm pulling out is my specialty loaf that we made. This was a honey cinnamon butter loaf. And I'm going to give it a nice, let's do a big kind of score. We'll see how this looks. And perfect. And then we're going to pop this into my round Dutch oven that I had preheating at 500 for the last hour. So it is very hot. There we go. Put my lid back on, seal in that nice moisture. And then we have our next loaf, which is just our basic sourdough. And I like to do this one in my loaf pan because I like to use it for our grilled cheese sandwiches. So the loaf makes nice little slices. And let's do something crazy today. We're going to do some just stripes. And do one more. There we go. We're going to put this one in my oval Dutch oven since it's a nice loaf. Perfect. And now we're going to put our lids on, and we're going to pop these in the oven at 500 degrees for 20 minutes, and then we'll take the lid off and cook them another 20 minutes at 450 degrees. So we've got our first one in, and now we're going to go put our second one in. Okay. And then I'm going to set my timer for 20 minutes so I don't forget to take the lid off. Always set a timer because you will forget. Okay. So we'll take these out. We'll take our lids off. So here's the first guy. We'll have our lid reveal. Very hot. And this was our cinnamon honey butter. You can see the melted butter in there. And I'm excited for this one. This one we did, we mixed cinnamon and sugar in it. And then we spread honey butter kind of paste on it while when we did the laminating and wrapping it up. We do have a video of that. And this is our traditional loaf. Beautiful. We did kind of the stripe pattern. And we'll pop that back in there. And then what I'm doing right now is I'm going to turn my temperature down to 450. So get that off. Because once you take the lid off, you want to turn it down. Otherwise, you're going to get a really dark crust on the top. And then I'm going to set my timer for another mushrooms because we are almost ready for dinner. So we'll do our breads, and then I'm going to do my touch on the steaks and see how they're doing. So here is our beautiful, this is our honey butter one with cinnamon in it. I'm going to put it right here. I'll take them out of our Dutch ovens in just a second. Oh, I hear you.
And you have questions? How many kids do you have?
I have 5 kids. So, and they range from a 1.5 to 3, or 14, 15, 1.5 to 15. It's a 1.5-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 15-year-old. Let me grab our steaks real quick. And perfect. We've got our steaks as possible so that the bottom stops cooking. Let me move this guy over here. Okay. So this is our delicious cinnamon honey butter. It's like a sweet dessert one. And then this is our beautiful traditional loaf. Let me grab this guy. And beautiful. So this, again, this is our traditional loaf. I did kind of a stripe print on it today. And this is our specialty loaf with cinnamon, honey butter swirl in it, and a little bit of, what is it? Cinnamon, honey, and sugar. That's exactly what it is.